we heard a lot about circular economy. Now it is time to look at the investors behind the transformation. The World Economic Forum just published a white paper on this topic. It's called Trendsetters, Transformational Investment Practices of Advanced Investors. My next guest is the author of the white paper, Ashley Knight. Let me go through your white paper and the findings. First of all, what was the goal behind the white paper?
Yeah, sure. So the initial white paper that was launched by the World Economic Forum and Mercer highlighted the 6 main global systemic risks that investors were most concerned about over the long term. And what we aim to do in phase 2 of the research, which is the paper that just launched, is really go deeper into how asset owners are addressing those global systemic trends like climate change and geopolitics and demographic shifts across their organizations and their investment portfolios. So the next layer down into governance and implementation.
Let me ask for the key takeaways.
Yeah, sure. One thing we noticed when we spoke with a lot of these asset owners and conducted an asset owner survey that more than 30 different sovereign wealth funds, pensions, endowments, foundations, and insurers completed was that there was a mismatch between where asset owners thought they were on a spectrum from developing to advanced and where they actually laid. And part of that is because unlike traditional investment frameworks where you can benchmark your IRR and TVPI to peers in an industry group, there's actually no current way to benchmark your approach to climate change or technological evolution in a systematic way. So one main takeaway from this research was this lack of ability for investors to do a gap analysis and identify challenges systematically. And so one key takeaway was the need for that. And now what we're doing is actually developing that benchmarking framework.
We talked a lot about measuring as well. It's also a main or a key point in your white paper. How much effort have they really put, into integrating the global systemic trends into their strategic decision-making process, adopting vision, governance, and implementation practices?
The process really differs by asset owner. Part of it is driven by different regulatory considerations, as well as kind of board oversight and what senior management's looking to do. But I would say that when we look across the spectrum from developing to advanced, and we speak with a lot of these advanced asset owners, they're looking beyond pure ESG metrics and standardization and looking for additional ways to capture material risks in their process, whether it's aligning their portfolios to SASB or thinking about incorporating TCFD consideration. There's a lot that's going on in the background at these organizations. And the key thought is what's most important to focus on, just because there is a lot of different metric considerations out there in the environment and pressure in some cases from underlying stakeholders to do more.
So if you look at your key findings again, many asset owners are not aware of how they compare to peers. What would you suggest to do?
So we're in the process now, and you can see kind of the first iteration of it in the white paper, of creating a self-assessment benchmark. So essentially what we do is we take all of the underlying subcomponent considerations across vision, governance, and implementation, and we create a 1 to 5 scale where 1 is not completed and 5 is completed. And we have asset owners go through each of the core components. Each subcomponent has anywhere from 5 to 15 different considerations. And through that work, we're actually able to have asset owners take a step back and realize where they are in their process. And in many cases, when we do this exercise, we found that, for the majority of the time, people are in that in progress kind of portion of their portfolio. When they take a step back and look at actually where they're rating 1s or 2s or not started or, just beginning to start, they can actually figure out where the gap is in terms of where they need to get to. And in that point, be more informed, both when they're speaking with their senior management, but also when they're trying to mobilize investment teams to do more in terms of addressing these global systemic trends.
Your white paper is also kind of a pledge for innovation in the financial industry. What stage are we now?
I think that, there's so many resources out there, from artificial intelligence to using the Woodwell Research Center to think about new ways to incorporate physical risk considerations in portfolios. And it really comes down to how these individual asset owners are thinking about capturing these global systemic trends in their portfolios. So in many cases, the innovation has been created, but now it's about adoption of these global systemic trends in terms of their organizations and investment portfolios. And so we're finding that a lot of folks are taking a step back and thinking about educating their key stakeholders, whether it be the board or senior management or investment teams, so they could actually take advantage of technological evolution and other key considerations as they better measure the impact that these trends have on their portfolios and their organizations.
So it's not only measuring and innovating, it's also getting involved with the management of these companies in order to improve business practices. Why so?
Absolutely. So when we did our asset owner survey, which more than 30 different asset owners participated in, representing $3.4 trillion in aggregate assets, we found that there was actually, when it came to climate change, as an example, kind of a preference for engagement over divestment. And part of the reason why is because many folks realize that have investments in benchmarks or whatever else, they're going to have certain weightings towards certain sectors. And they feel that if they really want to make a change and kind of hit decarbonization goals at the country level, they essentially will need to better engage with companies that historically were higher emitters. And so in essence, whether it's a transition pathway initiative that the Church of England and the EAPF kind of started, or whether it's other considerations in measurement terms, there are different ways that these asset owners can essentially take these different frameworks out there and tools and better figure out where there are gaps that exist and how they can do more to interact with management in terms of helping them move forward and further decarbonize their companies.
Looking at your findings at your survey on investors, on institutional investors, what kind of products do they focus on in addressing all these topics like climate change or ESG?
Yeah, sure. So in the asset owner survey, we specifically asked investors to mark off the current products that they're currently allocating capital to and those they're considering. So we found that there were quite a few common strategies in that area, which are further outlined in the white paper. And as an example, we realized that renewable energy infrastructure, green property, and energy efficiency funds were common ways that asset owners were addressing climate change. And multi-asset credit and distressed debt were common ways to think about low and negative rates. And we also asked, on the topic of, which products were under consideration. And we found that a lot of the responses were linked to the growing importance of social considerations, such as allocations to women and minority-owned firms or managed funds, microfinance, and affordable housing. And we also saw, emerging climate-related solutions such as sustainable agriculture, land conservation, and blue bonds come up quite a bit.
Your white paper has been published ahead of the G7, the G20 meeting, also the COP26 in Glasgow. What do you expect from all these events taking place, also for the ESG and the financial markets involved in ESG topics?
I think the dialogue is going to move beyond just speaking about what needs to be done and some of the challenges being faced towards action. And the reason why I say that is because in a lot of these World Economic Forum closed-door community events that we have, we see this acceptance and this push towards getting more granular in terms of what people are doing to better address these trends, especially when it comes to climate change and water security. And so I think that these conversations will really progress from just what needs to be done and what's the regulation behind what we should be doing, and more towards what are some steps we can actually take to get there. And a lot more of these investors doing gap analyses to figure out where they stand today and where they need to get to and what their peers are doing. So I think that's one definitive thing. And on the topic of getting more granular and kind of figuring out where you stand, I think more and more investors will use this benchmarking framework to better assess where they are from a developing to advanced spectrum across their vision, governance, and implementation approaches.
But you would say 2021 is going to be crucial for these kind of regulatory frameworks and also how investors assess ESG.
I think that we'll see more and more announcements come through. We already saw a lot of action out of the UK. Canada is doing a lot as well. And the impact of all of that not only affects what a lot of these organizations are doing from a governance process perspective and what boards are looking for, but I think it also creates this this incentive for certain investors in countries that don't yet have these regulations to think about ways that they can proactively address some regulations that may come in the future, so they have a process in place to be more informed and to kind of get ahead of what they may need to do in the future.